My children did this.
November 14th, 2019. Manhattan's Upper East Side. Police officers stand outside a $47 million penthouse, and what they're about to discover will shake the foundations of one of America's wealthiest families. Inside that penthouse, behind a locked closet door, an 82-year-old woman worth $3.2 billion is fighting for her life. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. She hasn't had water in over 30 hours. Her lips are cracked and bleeding. Her body is shutting down. And the two people responsible for putting her there are her own son and daughter. This is the story of how greed, entitlement, and a 4-pound Pomeranian named Mr. Buttons tore apart one of the richest families in America. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll question everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and what people are truly capable of when money is on the line. On that cold November morning, officers knocked on the door of Penthouse 12B. No answer. They knocked again. Still nothing. The call had come in from a concerned dog groomer who hadn't been able to reach her client for 2 days. It seemed routine. Probably just an elderly woman who forgot an appointment. But when police finally forced their way inside, they found something that would make headlines around the world. The penthouse was immaculate. Fresh flowers in crystal vases. Artwork worth millions on the walls. But there was an eerie silence. Then they heard it. A faint tapping sound coming from the master bedroom. Officers rushed down the hallway, threw open the bedroom door, and that's when they saw it. The closet door had been locked from the outside. Someone had wedged a chair under the handle. And behind that door, barely conscious, was Margaret Pemberton. When paramedics pulled her out, she could barely speak. Her first words were not about water or food. They were about her children. She whispered, "They did this. My own babies did this to me." And then she passed out. To understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back. Way back. Back to when Margaret Pemberton was just a young woman with nothing but ambition and a dream. Margaret was born in 1937 in a small town in Ohio. Her father worked at a steel mill. Her mother was a seamstress. They had nothing. But Margaret was smart. Incredibly smart. She got a scholarship to Barnard College in New York City, and in 1959, she graduated top of her class with a degree in business administration. This was a time when women weren't supposed to be in business. They were supposed to get married, have children, and stay home. But Margaret had other plans. In 1962, at just 25 years old, she took out a $5,000 loan and bought her first property, a rundown brownstone in Brooklyn. She renovated it herself, learned plumbing, electrical work, everything. Then she sold it for 3 times what she paid. And that's how it started. Over the next 4 decades, Margaret Pemberton built a real estate empire. She bought buildings in Manhattan when nobody wanted them. She transformed entire neighborhoods. By the 1980s, she was one of the wealthiest women in America. Forbes estimated her net worth at over $3 billion. She owned hotels, office buildings, apartment complexes across the country. She was ruthless in business, but charitable in life. She donated hundreds of millions to children's hospitals, cancer research, and animal welfare organizations. The public loved her. She was America's self-made billionaire. The woman who proved that with enough grit and determination, anything was possible. But her personal life told a different story. Margaret was married twice. Both husbands died. The first from a heart attack in 1973. The second from cancer in 1991. She never remarried. People said she was married to her work. And maybe they were right. But Margaret did have children. 2 of them, Robert and Catherine. Robert Pemberton was born in 1961. Catherine came 3 years later in 1964. They grew up in luxury that most people can't even imagine. Private schools, summer homes in the Hamptons, European vacations. Everything they ever wanted was handed to them on a silver platter. And that was the problem. Margaret gave them everything except the one thing they actually needed. She never taught them the value of money. She never taught them how to earn it, how to respect it, how to build something of their own. Robert went to Harvard, graduated with a degree in economics. His mother expected him to join the family business, to learn real estate from the ground up. But Robert had other ideas. He wanted to prove he could make it on his own. So in 1985, at 24 years old, he started a hedge fund. His mother gave him $10 million to get started. Within 3 years, he'd lost it all. Bad investments, risky bets, a lifestyle that burned through money faster than he could make it. Margaret bailed him out, gave him another chance. Another 10 million. He lost that too. Catherine took a different path. She became a socialite. Married a European aristocrat, Count Wilhelm von Sterling, in a wedding that cost $8 million. They lived in a castle in Austria for 5 years before the marriage fell apart. Turns out the Count was more interested in Catherine's money than Catherine herself. After the divorce in 1997, Catherine moved back to New York and threw herself into the party scene. Charity galas, fashion weeks. She was always in the society pages, always photographed with a champagne glass in one hand and a designer handbag in the other. But underneath the glamour, Catherine had a problem. She was a gambler. High-stakes poker, blackjack in Monaco, baccarat in Macau. She won sometimes, but mostly she lost. By 2005, she owed $12 million to various casinos and private lenders. Margaret found out and paid off every cent. But she made Catherine promise to stop. Catherine promised. She lied. By 2010, both Robert and Catherine were completely dependent on their mother's wealth. Robert had tried and failed at multiple business ventures. Tech startups, restaurants, a boutique hotel chain. Everything he touched turned to dust. He was 50 years old and had never succeeded at anything in his life. Catherine was 46 and drowning in debt again. This time, $15 million. She'd been gambling in secret for years. Margaret was furious. For the first time in their lives, she said no. She refused to pay Catherine's debts. She told both of her children that they needed to figure out their own lives. She'd given them everything. Private education, connections, opportunities, and they'd squandered it all. She told them she was done enabling their failures. This was the moment everything changed. Robert and Catherine had always assumed that one day, when Margaret died, they'd inherit everything. Billions of dollars. They'd never have to worry about money again. But now, for the first time, they started to wonder, what if their mother changed her will? What if she cut them out? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The year was 2016. Margaret was 79 years old. She'd slowed down considerably, retired from active management of her business empire. She spent most of her time in her Manhattan penthouse, alone. Her children visited occasionally. Holidays, birthdays. But the visits always ended the same way. Robert asking for money. Catherine asking for money. Margaret saying no. She was lonely. Deeply, profoundly lonely. Her husbands were dead. Her friends were dying. Her children only cared about her bank account. And then one day, everything changed. Margaret was walking through Central Park when she saw a woman with a small dog. A Pomeranian. Fluffy, adorable, bouncing with energy. Margaret stopped to pet the dog, and something inside her shifted. She'd never had pets growing up. Too poor. And as an adult, she'd been too busy building an empire. But now, with all the time in the world and nobody to share it with, she decided she wanted a companion. 2 weeks later, Margaret adopted a 4-pound Pomeranian puppy. She named him Mr. Buttons. At first, Robert and Catherine thought it was cute. Their aging mother had a little dog to keep her company. But then Margaret started to change. She stopped going to charity events. She stopped meeting with her financial advisors. All she wanted to do was stay home with Mr. Buttons. She had a custom wardrobe made for him. Tiny sweaters, little bow ties, a diamond-studded collar that cost $50,000. She hired a personal dog chef to prepare his meals. Organic chicken, wild-caught salmon. She took him everywhere. To restaurants where she'd book a table for two and Mr. Buttons would sit in his own chair. To her hair salon where he'd get groomed at the same time she did. People started to talk. They said Margaret had lost her mind. That she'd become one of those eccentric rich people who loved their pets more than people. But Margaret didn't care. For the first time in decades, she was happy. Mr. Buttons didn't want anything from her except love. He didn't ask for money. He didn't judge her. He didn't disappoint her. He was loyal in a way her children had never been. Robert and Catherine watched all of this with growing concern. Not because they cared about their mother's well-being, but because they saw their inheritance slipping away. Every dollar spent on Mr. Buttons was a dollar that wouldn't go to them. They started making jokes, called their mother crazy, said she'd gone senile. But Margaret wasn't senile. She was completely lucid. And in 2018, on her 81st birthday, she made a decision that would change everything. She called her lawyer and told him she wanted to update her will. What happened in that meeting would set in motion a chain of events that would end with Margaret locked in a closet, fighting for her life. The new will was simple. Robert and Catherine would each receive $5 million. Not nothing, but barely a fraction of Margaret's $3.2 billion estate. The rest would go into a trust established solely for the care and well-being of Mr. Buttons the Pomeranian. Pet trusts are completely legal in New York State. The money would be managed by professional trustees. It would fund Mr. Button's care for the rest of his life. Food, medical care, housing. After Mr. Buttons died, the remaining money would be donated to animal welfare charities across the country. Margaret's lawyer tried to talk her out of it. He explained that her children would almost certainly challenge the will, that this would create a legal nightmare. But Margaret was firm. She said her children had proven they couldn't handle money, that they'd waste it within a few years. But animals couldn't be corrupted by greed. This was her fortune. She'd built it with her own 2 hands. And she'd decide what happened to it. The lawyer drew up the papers. Margaret signed them. And then she did something that would seal her fate. She invited Robert and Catherine to her penthouse for her birthday dinner and told them about the will. The dinner started pleasantly enough. Expensive wine, catered food from Margaret's favorite restaurant. But after dessert, Margaret dropped the bomb. She told her children that she'd updated her will, that they'd each be receiving $5 million. Robert and Catherine smiled. $5 million wasn't bad. A nice cushion. But then Margaret continued. She told them that the rest of her fortune, all $3 billion plus, would be going to Mr. Buttons. The room went silent. Catherine thought her mother was joking. She laughed. But Margaret wasn't laughing. She was completely serious. Robert's face turned red. He asked his mother if she'd lost her mind. She said no. She'd finally found clarity. She told them that for years, she'd watched them fail. Watched them waste opportunities. Watched them come to her with their hands out, expecting her to solve all their problems. She said she loved them, but she didn't respect them. And she couldn't in good conscience leave billions of dollars to people who'd proven they had no idea how to manage money or build anything meaningful. Catherine started crying. She begged her mother to reconsider. Said they'd change. They'd prove themselves. But Margaret had made up her mind. Robert stood up, threw his napkin on the table, and walked out. Catherine followed. That was March of 2018. It would be the last civil conversation Margaret ever had with her children. Over the next year and a half, Robert and Catherine tried everything to change their mother's mind. They hired lawyers to assess whether they could challenge the will on grounds of mental incompetence. But every lawyer told them the same thing. Margaret was completely lucid. She'd been evaluated by multiple doctors. She understood exactly what she was doing. The will was airtight. They tried appealing to her emotions, sent her letters, left voicemails. But Margaret didn't respond. She'd cut them off completely. The only family member she cared about was Mr. Buttons. By late 2019, both Robert and Catherine were in serious financial trouble. Robert's latest business venture, a chain of organic juice bars, had failed spectacularly. He'd invested $2 million of borrowed money and lost it all. His creditors were threatening to sue. Catherine's gambling had gotten worse. She now owed $23 million. Loan sharks were calling her every day, threatening her. She was terrified. And both of them had the same thought. If Margaret died, they could challenge the will, argue that she'd been unduly influenced by the dog, that she wasn't in her right mind. A judge might side with them, might give them at least a portion of the estate, enough to solve their problems. But as long as Margaret was alive, they were stuck. And that's when the idea started to form. What if Margaret wasn't alive? What if something happened to her? Robert and Catherine started meeting in secret. Coffee shops in neighborhoods where nobody knew them. They couldn't meet at each other's homes, couldn't risk anyone overhearing. At first, they just vented, complained about their mother's cruelty, about how unfair it all was. But gradually, the conversations shifted. They started talking about hypotheticals. What would happen if Margaret died? How would they challenge the will? And then one night in October of 2019, Catherine said it out loud. What if they helped their mother die? Robert went quiet. Catherine kept talking. She said their mother was 82 years old. Old people died all the time. Heart attacks, strokes, falls. Nobody would question it. And if Margaret died before she could do anything else crazy, they'd have a real shot at getting the money. Robert should have said no, should have walked away. But he didn't, because he was 58 years old, a complete failure, drowning in debt. And he was angry. angry at his mother for choosing a dog over her own children. They started planning. They researched how elderly people die, looked up cases of natural deaths, learned about medications, about dehydration, about how long a person could survive without food or water. They talked about different scenarios. Poison would be too obvious. Toxicology reports would show it. A fall could work, but what if she survived? What if she told people they pushed her? They needed something that looked completely natural, something that couldn't be traced back to them. And then Catherine had an idea. What if they just left her somewhere? An elderly woman alone, unable to get help. She'd dehydrate, go into organ failure, die within a few days. And it would look like a tragic accident. An old woman who got confused, locked herself in a room, and couldn't get out. It happened all the time. Robert thought about it. It was risky, but it could work. They'd need an opportunity. A time when Margaret was alone, when the staff was gone, when nobody would think to check on her for a few days. That opportunity came in early November. Margaret's household staff took turns having days off. Robert and Catherine studied the schedule. They figured out that on November 12th, a Tuesday, the housekeeper would be off. The cook would be off. The only person scheduled to be there was Margaret's assistant, and Catherine called her, pretending to be calling on Margaret's behalf, and told her to take the day off. Margaret would be fine alone for one day. The assistant didn't question it. She was happy for the unexpected break. November 12th, 2019. Robert and Catherine showed up at their mother's penthouse at 6 p.m. They'd told Margaret they wanted to apologize, to make amends, to have dinner as a family. Margaret was surprised but cautiously hopeful. Maybe her children had finally grown up. Maybe they'd accepted her decision. She let them in. She opened a bottle of wine. They sat in the living room and talked. It almost felt normal, like old times. But the wine Margaret was drinking had been drugged. Catherine had crushed up sleeping pills and mixed them into the bottle before they arrived. Margaret didn't notice the taste. She'd had a glass and a half when she started to feel dizzy. She said she needed to lie down. Robert and Catherine helped her to her bedroom. She was weak, confused. She lay down on the bed and closed her eyes. She thought she was just tired. She had no idea what was about to happen. Robert and Catherine waited until their mother was barely conscious. Then they moved her, dragged her across the bedroom floor to the walk-in closet. She tried to resist, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She mumbled something, tried to ask what they were doing, but the words wouldn't come out right. They laid her on the closet floor, took her phone from the nightstand, took her medical alert bracelet. Then they closed the closet door and locked it from the outside. They wedged a chair under the handle to make sure she couldn't push it open even if she tried. Margaret woke up hours later in complete darkness. Her head was pounding. Her mouth was dry. She didn't understand where she was. She reached out and felt clothes hanging above her. Shoes on the floor. She was in her closet. She tried to stand, but she was too dizzy. She crawled to the door and pushed. It didn't move. She pushed harder. Nothing. She started to panic. She screamed for help, but her voice was weak. Nobody heard her. Hours passed. She screamed until her throat was raw. She pounded on the door until her hands were bruised. But nobody came. The penthouse was empty. Her staff had been given the day off. Her children were long gone. Margaret realized what had happened. Her own son and daughter had done this. They'd locked her in here and left her to die. She tried to stay calm, tried to think. Surely someone would come looking for her. Her assistant would return tomorrow, the housekeeper the day after. Someone would find her. She just had to survive until then. But surviving wasn't going to be easy. Margaret had no food, no water. The closet was completely dark. She couldn't see anything. She felt around for her phone, but it wasn't there. They'd taken it. She tried to regulate her breathing. Try not to panic. Panic would make things worse. She needed to conserve her energy. Stay alive. Just a little while longer. Day one passed. Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness. The sleeping pills were still in her system. She was disoriented, confused. She didn't know if it was day or night. She had no sense of time. Her mouth was so dry it hurt to swallow. Her stomach cramped with hunger. But the hunger was bearable. The thirst wasn't. Humans can survive weeks without food, but only days without water. Margaret knew this. She'd read about it somewhere. How long did she have? 3 days? 4? She tried to stay hopeful. Someone would come. Someone had to come. Day 2. Margaret was weaker. She couldn't stand anymore. Could barely move. She'd stopped screaming. It took too much energy. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her skin felt like paper. She kept thinking about Mr. Buttons. Her sweet little dog. Where was he? He'd been at the groomers when Robert and Catherine showed up. Was he still there? Was someone taking care of him? The thought of Mr. Buttons waiting for her, wondering where she was, broke her heart. She started to cry, but no tears came. Her body didn't have enough water to produce tears. She thought about her life, everything she'd built, everything she'd accomplished. And this is how it would end. Alone in a closet, killed by her own children. The children she'd given everything to. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her whole life building an empire to leave to her family, and her family had killed her for it. Day 3. Margaret was barely conscious. Her organs were starting to shut down. Dehydration was taking its toll. Her heart rate was irregular. Her breathing was shallow. She knew she was dying. She thought about fighting, about trying one more time to break down the door, but she didn't have the strength. She lay on the floor of the closet and waited for death to come. She thought it would be soon, maybe hours, maybe less. But then she heard something, a voice, faint, far away. Someone was in the penthouse. Margaret tried to scream, but nothing came out. She tried to bang on the door, but her arms wouldn't move. She used every ounce of strength she had left and tapped her knuckle against the wall. Tap, tap, tap. It was so quiet, too quiet. Nobody would hear it. But she kept trying. Tap, tap, tap. And then, like a miracle, she heard footsteps. Running, coming closer. The bedroom door burst open. She heard voices. Police. They'd found her. Officers broke the lock on the closet door, pulled it open. The smell hit them immediately. Urine, sweat, sickness. Margaret was lying on the floor, barely breathing. Her skin was gray. Her eyes were sunken. She looked like a corpse. Paramedics rushed in, started in 4, checked her vitals. Her blood pressure was dangerously low. Her heart rate was erratic. They needed to get her to a hospital immediately. As they lifted her onto a stretcher, Margaret opened her eyes. She looked at one of the officers and whispered something. He leaned in close. She said it again. My children did this. The officer wrote it down. Those 4 words would change everything. Margaret was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital. Doctors worked for hours to stabilize her. She was severely dehydrated, malnourished. Her kidneys were failing. She'd been hours away from death. But she was a fighter. She'd survived. And now, she wanted justice. Police immediately began investigating. They pulled security footage from the building, saw Robert and Catherine entering the penthouse on November 12th, saw them leaving 2 hours later, saw that nobody else had entered or exited until police arrived 2 days later. They searched the penthouse, found the chair wedged under the closet door handle, found Margaret's phone and medical bracelet hidden in a kitchen drawer, found the wine bottle with traces of sedatives. They obtained a warrant for Robert and Catherine's phone records, text messages, emails. What they found was damning. Months of conversations between the siblings, talking about their mother's will, about how unfair it was, about how they deserved the money. And then, in October, the messages got darker. Hypothetical discussions about what would happen if Margaret died, research into elderly deaths, links to articles about dehydration and starvation. It was all there. A clear pattern of premeditation. On November 18, 2019, police arrested Robert Pemberton at his apartment in Brooklyn. He was in his bathrobe, eating breakfast. He didn't resist. Seemed almost relieved, like he'd been waiting for this. That same morning, Catherine was arrested at a hotel in Midtown. She'd checked in under a fake name, had packed a suitcase, was planning to run. Officers found $10,000 in cash in her room, a fake passport. She'd been getting ready to flee the country. Both were charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and elder abuse. Bail was set at $5 million each. Neither could pay it. They sat in jail, waiting for trial. The media went absolutely insane. This was the story of the year. Billionaire heiress nearly murdered by her own children over a dog inheritance. Every news outlet covered it. Cable news, newspapers, magazines. The story went international. People couldn't believe it. Couldn't wrap their minds around the cruelty of it. What kind of people try to murder their own mother? Margaret spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering. When she was strong enough to talk, detectives interviewed her. She told them everything. How Robert and Catherine had drugged her. How they'd locked her in the closet. How she'd begged and screamed and fought for her life. She told them she'd known for years that her children were greedy. But she never thought they'd actually try to kill her. The interview was heartbreaking. Here was a woman who'd built an empire, who'd been strong and powerful and successful her entire life, reduced to a victim of her own children's greed. When asked if she wanted to press charges, Margaret didn't hesitate. She said yes. She wanted them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. They'd tried to murder her. They deserved to pay for what they'd done. The trial began in March of 2020. Robert and Catherine hired the best defense attorneys money could buy. Actually, money they didn't have. The attorneys worked on contingency, hoping that if they won, they'd get paid from the inheritance. The defense strategy was simple. Argue that Margaret was mentally incompetent, that her obsession with Mr. Buttons proved she wasn't in her right mind, that the will was invalid because she lacked the capacity to make rational decisions. They brought in psychiatrists who'd never examined Margaret, but were willing to testify that leaving billions to a dog was evidence of dementia. They showed photos of Mr. Buttons in his designer outfits, videos of Margaret talking to him like he was a person. They tried to paint her as a crazy old woman who'd lost touch with reality. But the prosecution had Margaret herself, and she was sharp, articulate, completely lucid. She took the stand and testified for 4 hours. She explained her reasoning behind the will, said it wasn't about the dog. It was about teaching her children accountability, about not rewarding failure, about making sure her money did good in the world instead of enabling two people who'd already proven they couldn't handle it. She described the night Robert and Catherine locked her in the closet, how terrified she was, how she'd thought she was going to die, how she'd lain on that floor and realized that the two people she'd loved most in the world cared more about money than her life. The courtroom was silent. Some jurors were crying. Margaret's testimony was devastating. The defense tried to cross-examine her, tried to poke holes in her story, but she was unshakable. Every question they asked, she answered with clarity and conviction. The prosecution also presented the evidence. The text messages, the internet search histories, the timeline. It all pointed to one conclusion. Robert and Catherine had planned this. They'd drugged their mother. They'd locked her in a closet. They'd left her to die, and they'd done it for money. Money they hadn't even earned. The defense put Robert and Catherine on the stand. It was a disaster. Robert claimed they'd only wanted to talk to their mother, that they'd given her wine to help her relax, that she must have locked herself in the closet by accident. It made no sense. The prosecutor tore him apart, asked him why they'd taken her phone, why they'd wedged a chair under the door, why they'd told the staff to take the day off. Robert couldn't answer. He stammered, contradicted himself. It was clear he was lying. Catherine's testimony was even worse. She broke down crying, said she loved her mother, said they never meant to hurt her. But when the prosecutor showed her the text messages, the ones where she and Robert discussed leaving Margaret somewhere to die, Catherine had no explanation. She said she didn't remember writing them, that she must have been drunk. The jury didn't buy it. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On April 9, 2020, they returned with a verdict. Guilty. Both Robert and Catherine were found guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, kidnapping, elder abuse. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Margaret attended. She sat in the front row and watched as the judge sentenced her son to 25 years in prison, her daughter to 22 years. Both would be eligible for parole eventually, but they'd be old by the time they got out. Robert would be 83. Catherine would be 76. The same age their mother was when they tried to kill her. As they were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, both Robert and Catherine looked at Margaret. She stared back. Her face was blank. No anger. No sadness. Just nothing. They'd lost her love a long time ago. Now they'd lost their freedom too. After the trial, Margaret went back to her penthouse. She had round-the-clock security now. Cameras everywhere. She trusted no one. The closet where she'd nearly died had been completely renovated. She couldn't bear to look at it the way it was. Mr. Buttons was returned to her. He'd been staying with Margaret's assistant during the trial. When she saw him again, Margaret broke down sobbing, held him close, told him she was sorry. Sorry for leaving him. Sorry for everything. Mr. Buttons licked her face, wagged his tail. He was just happy she was home. Over the next year, Margaret tried to rebuild her life. She hired new staff, people she'd vetted extensively. She reconnected with old friends, started going to charity events again. But she was different, quieter, more withdrawn. The attack had changed her. She had nightmares about the closet, about the darkness, about dying alone. Her therapist said it was PTSD, that she needed time to heal. But some wounds don't heal. In 2021, Margaret did something unexpected. She updated her will again. She still left the bulk of her fortune to Mr. Button's trust. That didn't change, but she added a provision. $500 million would go to her grandchildren. Robert and Catherine had 3 kids between them. 2 from Robert's first marriage. 1 from Catherine's. Margaret barely knew them. The kids had been kept away from her by their parents. But Margaret wanted to give them a chance her own children never had. The money would be held in trust until each grandchild turned 30. They'd receive it in installments. With conditions. They had to complete college. Had to work for at least 5 years. Had to demonstrate financial responsibility. Margaret didn't want to make the same mistake twice. She wanted to teach them what she'd failed to teach Robert and Catherine. That money is earned, not given. She also donated $1 billion outright to animal welfare organizations across the country. Shelters, rescue groups, veterinary research. She wanted to make sure that when she was gone, animals would be protected, cared for, loved. Because animals, unlike people, couldn't be corrupted by greed. The will was finalized in October of 2021. Margaret was 84 years old. Her health was declining. The attack had taken a toll on her body. Doctors said the dehydration had caused permanent kidney damage. She was on dialysis 3 times a week. She was tired, so very tired. But she held on. For Mr. Button's. For her grandchildren. For the knowledge that she'd done everything she could to make things right. On February 3, 2023, Margaret Pemberton died peacefully in her sleep. Mr. Buttons was curled up next to her. She was 85 years old. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Business associates. Charity organizers. Friends. Her grandchildren came. They'd never really known their grandmother, but they came to pay their respects. Robert and Catherine requested permission to attend. Permission denied. They watched from prison via video link. They weren't allowed to speak, weren't allowed to participate. They just watched as their mother was eulogized. As people talked about her brilliance, her generosity, her strength, nobody mentioned them. It was as if they didn't exist. Margaret was buried in a private ceremony. Only a handful of people attended. And Mr. Buttons, the little Pomeranian, sat on Margaret's assistant's lap throughout the service. He seemed to understand that something was wrong, that his person wasn't coming back. After Margaret died, the will went into probate. The $3 billion estate was distributed according to her wishes. The grandchildren's trust was established. The animal welfare donations were made. And Mr. Button's trust was activated. Mr. Buttons is 9 years old now. He lives in a beautiful estate in Westchester County, a property Margaret owned and left specifically for him. He has a full-time caretaker, a woman named Sarah who treats him like royalty. He has his own bedroom, his own wardrobe, a personal chef who prepares his meals. He gets regular vet checkups, grooming appointments. He wants for nothing. The trust is managed by a team of financial advisors. It's worth approximately $1.7 billion after the other distributions were made. The money is invested conservatively, grows every year. When Mr. Buttons dies, and Pomeranians typically live 12 to 16 years, the remaining money will go to animal charities. Every cent. That was Margaret's final wish. Robert is currently serving his sentence at a federal prison in Pennsylvania. He's 63 years old. He's eligible for parole in 2044. He'll be 82. Catherine is at a women's facility in New York. She's 59. Eligible for parole in 2041. She'll be 76. Neither has expressed remorse. In prison interviews, both maintain they were victims of their mother's mental illness, that they never intended to hurt her, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Nobody believes them. Their own children won't speak to them, have disowned them completely. When the grandchildren turn 30 and receive their inheritance, they'll be wealthy beyond measure. But they'll do it knowing what their parents did, knowing the price of greed. Hopefully, they'll learn the lesson Margaret tried to teach. That money doesn't make you happy. That family isn't about inheritance. It's about love, about loyalty, about being there for each other not because of what you can get, but because it's right. This story raises questions that don't have easy answers. Did Margaret make a mistake by giving her children everything? Should she have been harder on them earlier? Should parents be obligated to leave money to their children, or is it their right to do whatever they want with their fortune? And what about Robert and Catherine? Were they born broken, Or did privilege break them? Could things have turned out differently if Margaret had set boundaries sooner? If she'd taught them to earn instead of receive? We'll never know. What we do know is this. On November 14th, 2019, two people decided that money was more important than their mother's life. They drugged her. They locked her in a closet. They left her to die. And they did it without hesitation, without mercy, because in their minds, they were entitled to that money. It was theirs by birthright. But Margaret Pemberton didn't see it that way. She'd built her fortune with her own hands. And she decided that the most loyal, most loving companion she'd ever had was a 4-pound Pomeranian named Mr. Buttons. So she left him everything. And in doing so, she sent a message that echoed far beyond her own family. Love cannot be bought. Loyalty cannot be faked. And greed will destroy you. So now I want to ask you something. Do you think Margaret was right to leave her fortune to Mr. Buttons? Do you think Robert and Catherine deserved a chance at redemption? Or did they get what they deserved? And if you were in Margaret's position, what would you have done differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story affected you the way it affected me, hit that subscribe button. Because next week, we're covering another case that'll blow your mind.